Good morning aloha to everybody. 100 years ago today, women earned the right to vote. And since that time, 100 years ago, we have striven for true universal suffrage, that every single person in our country who's eligible to vote can vote. Starting earlier this year, we saw a series of actions by the Trump administration, specifically the US Postal Service, that taken together can only mean one thing: an effort to undermine the US Postal Service's function in our society. We are talking about one of the oldest institutions in our country, predating our country itself. An institution that is called out for in our Constitution. An institution that is critical to our economy, is critical to our society, is critical to our communities throughout our country. An institution that enjoys the highest rating by citizens of virtually any government institution. And yet we have seen over the last couple of months actions that do not respond to the needs of the US Postal Service in general, and especially do not respond to the needs of the Postal Services and all of us in the middle of an incredible crisis, and actions that specifically handicap the ability of the US Postal Service to deliver a full, fair, and free election through voting by mail. Now here in Hawaii, we just had probably the most successful vote by mail in the country. We had an incredible increase in turnout. We had virtually no fraud, no questions about any election results. Vote by mail works. And that seems to be the concern of this administration. That if we have widespread voting somehow, it is detrimental to the results of that election for this administration. That is wrong. That needs to be called out specifically, clearly, and deliberately across this entire country. Because we can have policy disagreements. We can have heated debate. We can have major decisions about the direction of our country in this presidential election and congressional elections across the country. But we have to be able to rely on the institutions of our government to deliver a result that the voters want. And so today, what this is about is calling out this administration for what can only be interpreted as efforts to undermine the election process. What can clearly be only interpreted by this administration as a sacrifice of the value of the US Postal Service in the middle of a critical crisis, when we have to rely on the mail for our economic stability, especially our small businesses who utilize the Postal Service much greater than many others. We have whole segments of our society that rely on the US Postal Service for their very lives. Our veterans, for example, rely on the Postal Service for their prescription medicines. We have Social Security matters that rely on the Postal Service. We have social interaction in an age of isolation that relies on the Postal Service. So why are we taking actions to handicap the Postal Service in the middle of all of this? Now, I think we would all understand that the Postal Service, as any other part of government, needs to be efficient, needs to respond to the budgetary requirements of our country, needs to deliver at a high rate of capability. And I believe our Postal Service does that. But where you need reforms in a government institution, you don't make those reforms in the middle of a critical time for the service. So if we want to return to the subject of the Postal Service next year and how we can improve the Postal Service if an administration thinks that there's something that needs to be done, then fine, let's get to it. But to underfund the Postal Service, to limit its operations, to dispense with critical equipment. If you add all of those things up, you really can come to no other conclusion but that this is designed to influence this election at the sacrifice of the functioning of the U.S. Postal Service in a crisis. And so today, we're calling on the Trump administration, along with many, many of my colleagues across this country, to reverse course completely. We want the U.S. Postal Service returned to the full range of services that were in place on January 1 of this year, before they started this campaign and crusade, I would say, against the Postal Service. Today you heard from the Postmaster General that he was, quote unquote, suspending some of the changes. All credit to the Postmaster General for suspending some of those changes. But be under no illusion, not all of those changes were suspended, number one. For example, the requirement that mail be delivered on a route that day, even if it requires some overtime, has not been suspended. And most critically, the Board of Commissioners of the Postal Service, the governing organization, which is composed of Republicans and Democrats, all appointed by the President, urged Congress to provide a $25 billion emergency appropriation to keep the Postal Service running through the COVID-19 crisis and to facilitate the Postal Service's full contribution to the election. The House has passed that $25 billion emergency assistance appropriation. The Senate has refused to act. And today, the Postmaster General pointedly did not endorse that emergency assistance. I can only conclude from that the actions of the Postmaster General today were all about show to maintain that, in fact, the administration supported the role of the Postal Service. But until the evidence is fully there to support that, we must conclude that the administration has other motives. This weekend, the U.S. House will again pass the $25 million emergency assistance package. This weekend, the U.S. House will pass a bill that not only fully funds the needs of the Postal Service through the crisis and the elections, but also calls to a full return to service as of January 1, 2020. If the Senate and the President believe, as I do, in how critical the U.S. Postal Service is for our country and for our Hawaii, they will quickly agree that this is what we need to do. And in fact, the President, or a President who really cared, would immediately appoint some emergency committee of some sort, to immediately get to the bottom of what the Postal Service needs to fulfill its function in the COVID-19 crisis and to assure full, free, and fair elections. I'm joined here today with friends that are here to speak in their own right on issues of concern to the Postal Service and to elections. And I will introduce them. First of all, we have with us Hawaii Attorney General Claire Connors, proudly wearing her women's suffrage banner. We have Terry Ka'olulo, retired of the National Association of Letter Carriers. And we have Chuck Lum, who's from the National Association of Postal Supervisors. And I'm really happy to have them here because I think we all know how good we have it right here with our own Postal Service. We have a wonderful relationship with our Postal Service. They are friends, they are neighbors, they are colleagues. They keep us in touch. And we owe them a debt of gratitude for their service during this pandemic. Let us not forget that in the heat of the pandemic, the public health crisis, they are essential workers. They must be on the job. They must deliver the mail. They must sort the mail at their own danger. And in fact, we have seen thousands of our postal workers throughout the country contract COVID-19, and we have seen too many die of COVID-19. So let us all reflect on what life would be like for us in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of one of the most critical elections in generations, if we did not have a fully functioning postal service. I am committed to making sure that that doesn't happen, and I am joined, I believe, by the vast majority of Americans in that.